Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you've not been here before, I'm Lenny and I have 5 Dachshunds, 4 long hair and 1 smooth. Well, it's been a long time, hasn't it? If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know this is the longest I've taken to post a video, so I'm sorry about that. Come on then. There's a weird shadow on the wall. There. What is that? Dunno. I can't see it in here. I can see it on there. That's so annoying. So the reason it's taken me so long to do another video is because I've been absolutely drowned in orders for Nemo and Crew, our company, which I'll talk a bit about later as well, because we are going to be launching a giveaway over on our Nemo and Crew Instagram tonight. So it's definitely worth going and checking that out, especially since we're all struggling for money at the moment. Everyone loves a giveaway. So I'll talk about that later. Anyway, today's video is going to be about the fact that I feed my Dachshunds raw. So I'm not claiming to be any raw expert. I definitely am not. I ask a lot of people for advice who I know more than me. I'm never afraid to ask people for advice, and raw diet is one of those things that I absolutely had no education on at all. And still, there's so much more to learn. I don't do DIY raw, so again, not an expert, but this is just my experience of feeding my dogs raw. Things that I noticed, things that are normal, that maybe people don't realise are normal. Also questions that I've been asked in my videos where I've showed what I feed my dogs, and things like that. So that's what I'm going to be touching on today. So raw diet basically means as it sounds, so feeding your dogs raw food. In the case of dogs, it usually means raw meat. Wait a minute, I'm just going to see how you pronounce a word that I'm not sure how you pronounce. Probably going to be an advert, aren't I?
Awful.
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 That doesn't sound right. Let's try again. Awful. Awful? Awful. God, that sounds so much more difficult to say. I'm just going to say awful. Makes more sense to me. So yeah, a raw diet usually consists of the meat, the offal, the bone, and then maybe some veg, depending on what you decide to do. So we started feeding raw by feeding the Nature's Menu Country Hunter nuggets. And the reason I went for those is because they do a venison nugget, which only has venison in it. And 2 of my dogs were showing signs of allergies. So I thought if I just feed one protein, I'll be able to then work out where the allergies are coming from. And basically, the second I started feeding them the venison Country Hunter, they showed no signs of this allergy anymore. So then I was pretty certain it was food. So then what I started doing was adding in one other protein at a time so that I could pinpoint which proteins were making them itchy and things. So we went through a few. We did rabbit, no reaction, perfect. We did duck. That gave them a little bit of a looser stool, but still no reaction. I just think that duck for them, they can only have small amounts. We then tried chicken, and it turns out that chicken seems to be the thing that gives them the highest amount of allergic reaction, so we don't feed chicken at all. We also don't feed beef because they had a reaction to beef as well. So we managed to break it down to they could eat venison, duck and rabbit were pretty much the main ones that we could get away with. So until this year, we've been feeding the Country Hunter nuggets alongside a kibble, which was a salmon kibble by Envy Dog Food, which again, they didn't have any reaction to. We've been feeding them together for, I don't know, 3 years maybe. And then this year, obviously, financially was a bit more difficult, and the Country Hunter nuggets are a bit more expensive than some other raw companies. So we went through a few other raw companies that do single protein meals, and we ended up settling on a company called Just Natural. But the difference between Country Hunter and Just Natural is that Country Hunter includes vegetables and Just Natural doesn't. So now there's a little bit of extra work for us in the fact that we have to try and make sure, well, you don't have to include vegetables in their diet. There's a load of argument over this, but we like them to have some vegetables, and we also use a supplement additional to the food just to make sure they're getting all the bits and bobs that we think they need. So I will include throughout this video various videos and photos of what we feed. So we still feed the Envy Dog Food kibble alongside the raw. So one of the questions I get a lot is, why do I still feed kibble if I feed a raw diet? And the answer to that is, when we first started feeding the raw diet, I noticed that a lot of the dogs were getting hungry, and not just hungry in the fact of begging, but actually showing symptoms of having an empty tummy. So one of those things that they were showing was acidic vomit throughout the day, so it might be in the morning or in the afternoon. So they weren't sicking up their food, they were just sicking up an empty stomach. So that made me think that maybe the raw, although it's obviously fantastic for them nutrition-wise, wasn't filling their tummy enough. They were definitely getting enough protein and enough food in terms of not gaining weight or losing weight, but I think their tummy was just empty on that. So I started adding the kibble. Financially, it works out a bit better because obviously kibble is cheaper. Well, actually, it's not cheaper, but financially it worked out a bit better for us to do kibble and raw. And also I find that it stops them from doing those sort of acidy sicks. So that's one of the points I wanted to actually bring up in this video, is if you move to a raw diet and you start finding your dog is being sick, if they're not sicking up the food and they're sicking up acid, usually that is a sign that they just have an empty stomach. So you might find that in the mornings, for example, they might be sicking up acid, and that just means that overnight they've got a really empty stomach, and dogs don't seem to cope with that very well, and they can often show signs of having an upset tummy even though they're just empty. So once you get them eating again, they're fine, but they tend to hesitate to eat because they've got an irritated stomach. So if you find that your dog on raw has started doing that, then I would advise that you either add a little bit more veg to their meal, or get a really high quality kibble and just add a little bit of it to their diet, or before bed just give them an additional tiny meal. I find that really works for mine, and that was something on raw that I wasn't expecting, that I've sort of learned over time. And so if my dog starts showing that as an issue again, then I know how to react to it, and I don't instantly think, oh my god, my dog's really poorly. So that's something that you might have noticed has happened, or something that might come up if you are thinking about changing to raw. Another thing that I noticed on the Country Hunter nuggets that's different to what they're on now is on the Country Hunter nuggets, I had to be really careful that I didn't give them too much bone. So the nuggets themselves seem to be quite high in bone, and when dogs have too much bone intake, they get really chalky poos and they come out white and quite stiff, and it must be quite uncomfortable for them. So I spotted on the Country Hunter that it seems like it has higher bone, so we would have to balance that out. So for example, if I wanted to give them a raw duck neck and that's got quite a lot of bone in it, I really don't think I could give them the Country Hunter the day after, because it just accumulates into way too much bone and they start getting those chunky poos. Whereas on the food that they're on now, I can buy one that doesn't have bone in. So it means that if I want to give them a duck neck, for example, that night I can give them a raw meal that doesn't have bone in to balance out that bone. Again, I'm sort of like, I just play it by ear and how things look, and like just using a bit of common sense. But there is actually some magic to this that again, I'm not an advanced raw feeder, so I'm sure there is some magic to it. They say an 80-10-10 diet is the way to go, but I think it's different for every dog. So that is, again, another thing to be aware of. If your dog, you move them onto raw and they start getting these sort of chalky poos, they're really firm, they're white, it's just too much bone intake. It's nothing dangerous, but it just means that the food that you are feeding them is clearly too high in bone for them, so you need to balance that out in some way. So whether that means that you add a little bit more meat to their diet, you can often buy just minced meat from raw suppliers so that it doesn't include the bone. So you can start to balance that out yourself. The other thing that you might notice on raw diet that I notice is that my dogs eat a lot faster. So a lot of people will buy something called a slow feeder bowl. Again, I'll include some photos on this. So if you go and purchase a slow feeder bowl, it's good to start with really, because you're probably going to find if your dogs come from a kibble to raw, they are going to love it and they're just going to wolf it down. And it's not very good for them to eat too fast. So a slow feeder bowl is a good idea. You can also look at, if you're happy to do so, buying some disposable gloves or washable gloves and actually hand feeding the raw to them. And hand feeding is a really good way of bonding with your dog. So it's also a good way to just sort of include training in your feeding regime. So that's something to consider as well, to slow down the eating, bond with the dog, include a bit of training during feeding time. That's another way to work on that. When you first move on to raw, I decided to move them straight away. So I didn't do any sort of like mixing it in with their food and slowly bringing it up, because I was doing it on an allergy basis, so it wouldn't really make sense to do that anyway. But what I must say is we really didn't have any issues with that just straight swap onto raw, and a lot of people do advise it's actually the best way to do it. So if you are thinking about going onto raw, consider just doing a straight swap. You might find that, especially if they've been on a really terrible kibble, that because the protein levels are so much higher, they get a little bit of an upset tummy or a little bit of a looser stool. But it does start to work itself out, so please don't panic. Just leave it a couple of days to sort of get back into the swing of things, and you'll find they're absolutely fine. As long as they're staying hydrated, it really doesn't matter if they have a slightly looser stool for a few days. So I would advise, based on my experience and how easy it was, to do that straight swap onto raw. I'm going to include some links below of the food that we feed. There are so many brands out there, so I'm just sharing them because they work for us. You know, we get a nice variety for the dogs never get bored, and we have been finding this particular brand a lot more affordable than what we were on before. So I still think that Country Hunter was a good way for us to step through the door into raw. Oh my god, I am a poet. But I think that this particular brand that we're on now, Just Natural, it is just a bit more affordable for us, but it does mean that I have to do a little bit more of DIY in terms of adding a few vegetables here and there, and also purchasing the supplement that we use, which again, I'll link below. So I guess that's 4 major points that I've noticed from raw. So the straight swap was absolutely fine, but maybe slightly looser stools, but they got over that. The chalky poops, I've now sort of worked out how to even that out. The acidic stomach in the mornings or in the afternoon, now I know just to give them a little meal or something to try and top that up and stop that from happening. And then the eating a lot faster when they're on raw, so just getting a slow feeder bowl if you need it. So that's all I've really got to say about my experience of feeding raw. If you are considering feeding raw, there are loads of Facebook groups for raw feeding. Just pop it in the search bar at the top and ask any questions you have in there, because there will be a lot more people with a lot more experience in there for you. And this is just really my experience of it. I hope this has been helpful to you if you've been considering moving your dog onto raw, or you've just moved them and you're starting to see these things pop up. If you've got any questions, then obviously pop them below, and if I don't know the answer, I'll ask someone who will know the answer, because I've got some fantastic friends with a lot of knowledge. So please do comment below. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe, because it helps us lots and lots. And before I finish, I just wanted to remind you, as I said at the beginning of this video, it is currently, what date is it? It's currently the 22nd of December, and either tonight or tomorrow, because I'm not exactly sure, I will be launching a giveaway over on our company page, which is on Instagram at Nemo and Crew. So please do pop over there and follow us and follow the steps to be involved in that giveaway. There are loads of companies working with us, and I will go through them now. So just to add those companies in there, because we are trying our best to support small businesses and all support each other over on Instagram and Facebook and things, because this year has been stupidly tough for everyone, and since becoming a small business I realised how much I didn't support small businesses enough. So these are the companies that are going to be involved in the giveaway. So if you go over onto the at Nemo and Crew page on Instagram, you'll see all the details of how to enter. If you've watched this video now and that post isn't up yet, it's going to be up in the next 24 hours, don't worry. So the companies that have joined us in this giveaway are Ari Original, By Alice and Hector, Darcy the Dapple Dax, Hugo and Ted Limited, Peachy Hounds, The Pretty Little Ink Co, and Tumblebone Bowties. So these are all dog owners that own small businesses over on Instagram or Facebook, or they've probably got their own websites as well. And they're all giving something away on our Nemo and Crew giveaway, so please do pop over to the page and have a look. Here's one of the items that is from the Nemo and Crew boutique, which is the burgundy jumper. Yes, I am looking at myself when I do this. But yeah, so please do go and check it out. And that's really all I've got to say today. Hopefully this has been useful. Bit of raw feeding information from someone who knows nothing about raw feeding. No, I do know what I've learned. The basics. Which I think is what people need as the basics, because when you actually jump into Googling about raw feeding, it's the most intimidating thing in the world. So just knowing the basics, like being able to grab something off a shelf and it just work, and then things that you can do to compensate if it doesn't work, I think is useful. So hopefully this has been useful for you. And as I always say, it is Dachshund, not Dachshund, not Dachshund, Dachshund. Cheers guys!